You know when something is so ingrained into our culture that we use an entire phrase to describe it. Like when something is so good that it becomes the gold standard and people start using it as a verb. That's what happened to Kodak. We didn't just take pictures, we took Polaroids. It was a Kodak moment. For decades, Kodak ruled the photography market. Their name became synonymous with photography itself. But then, without warning, it all came crashing down. In 2012, the photography giant with a 125-year history filed for bankruptcy. Kodak, the OG camera company, went bankrupt. But how did this iconic brand lose its sparkle? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning. In 1888, an American businessman named George Eastman wanted to make photography accessible to everyday people. Up until that point, cameras were clunky and expensive. But Eastman had an idea for a camera that was small and simple enough for anyone to use. He also created the first flexible roll film, and with that, Kodak was born. By the early 1900s, Kodak products and film were flying off the shelves. People everywhere were taking pictures, and it wasn't long before Kodak became a household name. By the mid-20th century, Kodak controlled over 85% of US camera sales and 90% of film sales. They were a corporate giant worth billions, and even made it to the Dow Jones Industrial Average. At one point, the company even had a secret weapon, a silver halide crystal, that made their film incredibly light-sensitive, ensuring a high-quality photo every time. But here's where things get interesting. In 1975, a Kodak engineer, Steve Sasson, invented the world's first digital camera. He essentially built a full-fledged camera that could capture and store images digitally without the need for film. But management didn't want anything to do with it. They feared the digital camera would cannibalize film sales, which accounted for more than 90% of the company's profits. So they shelved the invention and continued to invest in film. Fast forward to the 1990s, and digital cameras started gaining traction in the market. Companies like Sony, Canon, and Nikon jumped on the opportunity and dominated the market. Kodak was once again late to the party, and this time they weren't able to play catch-up. None of their attempts to enter the digital market really took off, and that was mainly because these competitors had already built a strong ecosystem that was extremely difficult to crack. As a result, Kodak's film business began to crumble. People no longer needed to buy film or get their photos developed at the drugstore. They could now take photos digitally and instantly share them with anyone in the world. To make matters worse, smartphone manufacturers soon realized they could incorporate basic cameras into their phones. And by the late 2000s, film sales had dropped more than 80% since their peak in the 1990s. Instead of investing in cameras and film, Kodak invested heavily in printers and other side businesses, none of which could replace the revenue from film. And this brings us to the biggest reason why Kodak collapsed. Management was slow to respond to the changing market conditions. For decades, Kodak had been a highly successful company, thanks to film. But as the digital age dawned, they clung to the past instead of embracing the future. They tried to ride out the storm, but by the time they realized how quickly the market was changing, it was too late. The digital wave had already crashed, and there was no turning back. Kodak continued to bleed money, but rather than pivot, management resorted to cutting costs, slashing jobs and closing factories. But none of that saved the company. Kodak was dying, and there was nothing they could do about it. In January 2012, after 125 years in business, Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company that brought the world photography was itself in crisis. To make matters worse, Kodak had more than 5,000 employees and tens of billions of dollars in debt. They needed a way out, and that way came in the form of a lifeline, an offer from a hedge fund that allowed Kodak to keep operating while it explored its options. Eventually, Kodak decided to sell thousands of its patents and shut down its unprofitable divisions. This infusion of cash gave them a fighting chance. Today, Kodak still exists, but it's a shell of its former self. It's a far cry from the Kodak that dominated the 20th century. Now, the company focuses on imaging, printing, and tech solutions. Kodak's story isn't just a business case study. It's taught in classrooms around the world as a cautionary tale: innovate or vanish. Kodak invented digital photography, but in fearing the unknown, they vanished anyway. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.